Hello everyone, Daniel Cote here. In this series of videos, I present some key ideas on cooperative management that I've been working on for the past 30 years. In this second video, I introduce my concept of the new cooperative paradigm. The idea of this new cooperative paradigm came to me while observing the market transformation in the mid-1990s, transformations that are still going on. A few key words to capture the essence of this transformation. While the 20th century was centered on the quest for efficiency, companies in this 21st century are seeing their products and services becoming commodities. They are faced with radical technological change, particularly via the internet as consumer power grows. They operate in industries that are often mature and saturated. They are therefore looking for new value creation strategies to better compete in this new environment. The strategies I have identified through an extensive search of the academic literature are value congruence, psychological ownership, loyalty and engagement, and value co-creation. For each of these strategies, I sought to answer three questions. How do these strategies create value? What connections can we identify between the foundations of these strategies and the foundations of the cooperative organizations? What are the competitive advantages of the cooperatives in relation to each of these strategies? It is by working to answer these three questions that I have developed this model of a new cooperative paradigm. This approach enables me to revisit the traditional cooperative paradigm to identify sources of inherent competitive advantage in the light of market transformations. In this video, I discuss the issue of value congruence. The importance of values within organizations is well established, particularly as companies struggle to recruit and retain the best employees, while the war for talent becomes a strategic issue. In this context, and as many research studies have demonstrated, value congruence, that is, the alignment of values between our employees and the organization, is a key factor for the success of organizations. The consequences of this congruence of values are greater job satisfaction, commitment, identification, and retention of employees. When it comes to the cooperative, values are the heart of its identity. These values have been universally endorsed for over a century and a half. But several key questions need to be answered. How are these values put into practice within the cooperative? What impact do they have on management and commercial practices? What impact do they have on performance of the cooperative? What's more, we also need to keep in mind the identity crisis I described in the first video. Given this observation, what remains of these values at a time when competitive and institutional isomorphisms are pushing cooperatives to resemble private companies more and more? While exploring the literature on values and corporate performance, I came across the work of Schwartz on values. Schwartz, a social psychologist, has been researching universal values for over 40 years. He is internationally recognized as a leading authority on the subject. Researchers have been using his taxonomy of values extensively. What can we learn from his work? Here are a few key findings. The universal taxonomy has been validated in every culture. At the heart of this theory is the idea that values form a circular structure that reflects the motivations that each value expresses. Schwartz identifies 10 motivationally distinct value types and specifies the dynamic relationship between them. Some values conflict with each other, for example, benevolence and power, while others are compatible, for example, conformity and security. The 10 values can be grouped around 2 axes and 4 dimensions. Along the first axis, we have openness to change and the values of stimulation and autonomy, conservatism, and the values of tradition, conformity, and security, which aim to preserve the status quo. Along the second axis, Schwartz positions self-transcendence with the values of universalism and benevolence, and self-enhancement with the values of power and personal achievement. Self-enhancement captures self-interested motivations, even at the expense of others. Self-transcendence refers to values that motivate people to overcome their selfish concerns and promote the well-being of others and of nature. It is broken down into the secondary values of equality, social justice, and environmental protection, which Schwartz calls universalism, as well as mutual aid, loyalty, honesty, and forgiveness, which he calls benevolence. With this taxonomy of values in mind, we can revisit the cooperative values through a new perspective, a new paradigm. But first, let's recall the cooperative distinct features. 3 key aspects to remember. First, the cooperative is an economic organization controlled by its users, pursuing a raison d'être focused on member service and their well-being. From the moment they are focused on strengthening the status of members as users, the economic considerations on which cooperative activity is based are bound to be extended and enriched by more fundamental considerations, as captured by its values. Second, it is characterized by a democratic power structure from which emerges a scale of values based on recognition of the fundamental equality of members. This approach highlights the fact that a cooperative is fundamentally a group of human beings. Third, its surpluses are shared in proportion to members' activities with their cooperative, leading to a concern for greater equity and social justice, compared with the private enterprise where profits are captured by the shareholders. Coherent with these fundamental characteristics, the cooperative values universally recognized are self-help, democracy, equality, solidarity, and ethical values, namely honesty, openness, social responsibility, and benevolence towards others. So, based on the core elements of the cooperative distinctiveness, its values, both as recognized by the International Cooperative Alliance since its foundation in 1895, the strong convergence between cooperative values and the self-transcendence value is clearly supported. And now, what can we learn from this convergence, this new perspective on cooperative values? So I return to the question asked earlier, how these values can and should be embedded within the cooperative. Can they be linked to performance? Also, can we revisit the identity crisis discussed in my first video through this new cooperative paradigm and this value of congruence strategy? Given the large volume of research involving Schwartz's work and his taxonomy of values, several observations can be made. First, about the importance of self-transcendence profile and therefore of the cooperative values. As mentioned, Schwartz and his colleagues tested and demonstrated the universal nature of this taxonomy of values. What's more, they also assessed the relative importance of the 4 value profiles: openness to change, conservatism, self-transcendence, and self-enhancement. The self-transcendence profile proved to be the dominant one. It is found in over 60% of human beings. This is followed by openness to change, self-enhancement, while conservatism comes in the 4th place. Therefore, when the strong similarity with self-transcendence is established, the cooperative values should be recognized as dominant values worldwide. A first observation that is far from trivial. Next, what about values as a performance enabler? Many researchers are using Schwartz taxonomy of values to address this very question. Here are some key findings. First, the profile of self-transcendence, particularly benevolence, is correlated with employees' incentive to cooperate rather than compete with their colleagues. Second, this value profile reinforces ethical behavior within the organization, which translates into a people orientation focused on dignity, respect, altruism, justice, support, and social responsibility. It should be noted, however, that when integrated into the organizational culture, ethical behavior will have a positive impact on the ability to attract and recruit employees and on company performance. What's more, the development of ethical expertise is accentuated when people's value profile is one of self-transcendence. Third, a value profile focused on self-transcendence correlates with the employees adopting pro-social behavior, which has an influence on the employee's behavior at work and on his and her performance. This pro-social behavior incites employees to take initiatives, help others, persist in important tasks. Fourth, the self-transcendence profile also has an impact on reinforcing authentic leadership. Values are also linked to the employee's effective commitment to the organization. This type of commitment is a key asset for the success of the organization. It manifests itself in personal initiative, greater adaptability, persistent effort towards the organization's goal, and a desire to go beyond the status quo. Value congruence between the employees and the organization is recognized as a key antecedent of this effective commitment. The level of effective commitment will be higher in organizations where values are clearly articulated and promoted. It is therefore important to develop practices, both organizational and personal, to support strong and clear links between values, mission, and vision. In this context, the findings of empirical research on values must be considered. Two conclusions to be retained. First, the importance of giving priority to value of self-transcendence. Second, the need to build a congruence of values based on self-transcendence at the heart of this alignment of values between the employees and the organization. Back to the question I asked at the start of this presentation about the need to demonstrate the impact of cooperative values on performance and its ability to differentiate itself based on values. The result drawn from research based on Schwartz taxonomy of values clearly reinforces this viewpoint. Now, let's address the question of cooperative competitive advantage in relation to values. Can we talk about a cooperative advantage compared to private enterprise? On these important questions, since the primary goal of investor-owned corporations is shareholder wealth maximization, the values characterizing private enterprise are more focused on a profile of self-enhancement, that is, the accumulation of wealth and power, and the pursuit of personal interests and gains. Such a value profile is consistent with a pro-self culture as opposed to a pro-social culture and self-transcendence. While a value profile of self-transcendence as opposed to self-enhancement appears to be superior, I believe that the cooperative values seen as a resource can represent a source of competitive advantage. They are valuable as a source of value creation. They are rare, considering that private companies are more aligned with the self-enhancement profile. And they are difficult to imitate, given their historical dependence, their ambiguity linking behaviors and performance, and their social complexity. Finally, for the cooperative values to be manifested in practice and the competitive advantage to manifest itself, they need to be activated. Here are a few ways of activating values. Make people aware of the links between values and decisions. Also recall how these values are associated with a given product. Allow individuals to experiment with the relevance of values linked to a given behavior. Associate values with important achievable objectives. Influence values through planning. Socialize individuals through corporate culture, etc. So many ways to activate values for greater consistency and harmony, reflecting the cooperative values at the heart of a cooperative corporate culture. A final comment on values. In my first video, I talked about the identity crisis affecting many cooperatives. This observation and my analysis of it points to a loss of meaning for cooperative distinction. In so doing, the orientations, actions, and methods of cooperatives will be less and less driven by cooperative values and principles. Rediscovering the importance and scope of the cooperative values means rethinking their place in the cooperative business model, where they can be seen as a factor of competitiveness. This is what the trend from the third to the fourth quadrant illustrates. Thank you for listening.